Hey Alex, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good.
Looking forward to the talk. Is it going to be your thesis? Is that what the plan is for this to become that?
Yeah, so kind of two different projects that kind of build off each other.
That's great.
Yeah.
Definitely be useful to get the feedback early on because
Yeah, yeah,
I've definitely gotten like deep into projects without really presenting it, and then when you talk about it in front of any audience, like even just yourself reflecting on it while you're saying the words, like, oh, maybe that doesn't make the most sense, or maybe I could change this. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a good opportunity.
yeah, definitely still for feedback now and then the forum, which is coming up so soon.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll give people a few more minutes to pile in, and then I'll give a just a short what iGuide is and tell people to go to the forums. They can see your talk again, and then we'll hand it over to you.
Sounds good.
I guess I'll get started with the iGuide spiel. I'm sure there'll be a few more people coming in, but if you're not familiar, iGuide is the Institute for Geospatial Understanding through an Integrative Discovery Environment. And it is a cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary collaboration of people at institutions around the US and around the world working on sustainability challenges using a variety of techniques, but a lot centered around data science, GeoAI, trying to find these cross-cutting challenges, these cross-cutting methodologies to build a sustainable future. And if you're not familiar with iGuide, highly recommend you check out our website because we have weekly virtual consulting office talks like this, but over a variety of topics. For example, next week we have Wen Zhou giving a transformer-based multitask deep learning model for urban livability evaluation by fusing remote sensing and textual geospatial data. And then we're taking a break the week after for the iGuide forum. So if you're in the Chicago area, definitely check out the information for that. It's co-located with let me get the name correct, Sustainability and Resilience, the Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress in Chicago, and it's right on the river by like the pier and the bean, if you've ever seen those pictures. So it's a great location, even if you're just popping over to do some sightseeing. And then the week after that, we've got a VCO by Sue Han from Texas State University, who will be talking about open source spatiotemporal geovisual analytics with CyberGIS Viz, a COVID-19 case study. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to today's speaker, Kaylee Chan, who will be talking about green stormwater infrastructure effects on mosquito habitats and West Nile virus prevalence in the United States.
Thanks for the introduction. Let me just share the screen. All right, cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Kaylee, and today I'll be talking about my research, which is focused on green stormwater infrastructure, looking at effects on mosquito habitats and West Nile virus prevalence in the United States. And also, I just finished my first year of my master's program in ecology, evolution, and conservation biology. And so, just for a brief outline for this presentation, we're going to be talking about two different research questions that kind of build off one another. The first being, how does green stormwater infrastructure affect mosquito habitats? And we'll be looking at examples from infiltration catch basins and rain gardens. And then the second question I'll be talking about is, what parts of the US are suitable for green stormwater infrastructure, and how will this affect West Nile virus prevalence? So to start off with just some background, so the goal behind stormwater infrastructure in general is to manage stormwater runoff, and typically this is done with conventional stormwater infrastructure. And so conventional stormwater infrastructure is designed to help remove stormwater runoff away from its source and then discharge it back into nearby water bodies. Some examples of conventional stormwater infrastructure you might be familiar with are stormwater catch basins, storm drains, storm pipes, or gutters. This here is an example of a stormwater catch basin. You've probably seen these lining the streets. Basically, stormwater just flows in, sits at the bottom, collects before ultimately draining into the sewer system, and then eventually it will be discharged back into a nearby water body. But with conventional stormwater infrastructure, we do run into some negative effects, particularly around water quality in the environment. And so there are kind of two different mechanisms that conventional stormwater can reduce environmental water quality. The first being the issue of combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. And so in a combined sewer system, the same pipes will carry both stormwater and raw sewage. And normally under like dry conditions, this would be somewhat fine. But during intense precipitation events, the sewer system can get really overwhelmed, and this can cause raw sewage to be discharged into water bodies, having obvious negative environmental effects. And then the second way is just the idea that stormwater isn't filtered in any way before it enters the sewer system or once it's in the sewer system. And so that means that, for example, any pollutants or nutrients, heavy metals, whatever, any of that that's in the stormwater will end up in the sewer system and will eventually end up back into water bodies. And so those are two ways that conventional stormwater infrastructure is pretty bad for the environment. And then also from a more mosquito perspective, it can provide a really good habitat for mosquitoes. And so specifically, these stormwater catch basins can provide good mosquito habitats because, as I mentioned before, stormwater will flow in and just remain stagnant at the bottom of the catch basin, and that standing water can provide really good habitats for mosquitoes. But on the flip side, we have green stormwater infrastructure, which is designed to capture and infiltrate stormwater runoff near its source. And so some examples you might be familiar with or have heard of before include rain gardens, bioswales, green roofs, or permeable pavement. This here is an example of a rain garden, and it's designed to capture stormwater runoff from the sidewalk and from the street and then infiltrate it into the soil. Green stormwater infrastructure is often seen as an alternative to conventional methods because it can have positive impacts on the environment, specifically around water quality again. And so by using infiltration capacities of the soil, green stormwater infrastructure can reduce the volume of stormwater entering the sewer system if more of it's being infiltrated into the ground. And this is helpful because it can help reduce the likelihood of combined sewer overflows during really intense storm events. Also, certain types of green stormwater infrastructure, for example, biospills, will use the soil to filter out the stormwater before it enters into the sewer system. And this can help remove any pollutants, et cetera, anything that's in the stormwater. And so that cleaner water will enter the sewer system and will eventually be discharged into water bodies. But from a mosquito perspective, prior to this study that I'll get into soon, the effects of green stormwater infrastructure on mosquito habitats was unknown. And so now for just a bit of background, some mosquito background, the vector that we'll be talking about is Culex pipiens. These are the primary vectors of West Nile virus in north central United States. According to the CDC, there have been about 59,000 reported cases of West Nile virus since it first emerged back in 1999. But this is definitely an underreporting of the total case number. Some studies estimate that the actual case number could be closer to about 7 million. Also, there's no human vaccine that currently exists for this virus, so kind of emphasizes the importance of prevention efforts in preventing disease transmission in the first place. These mosquitoes are also very abundant in urban and residential areas because of the presence of artificial aquatic habitats in these areas. So any type of artificial container that can hold water, for example, a rain barrel in a lawn or an unused flower pot, but especially these conventional stormwater infrastructure, specifically those conventional catch basins that I talked about before, can provide a really good habitat for these mosquitoes. And so now we'll move on to the first research question, which is looking at how does green stormwater infrastructure in Aurora, Illinois affect mosquito habitats? And so we're looking at Aurora, which is located up in northern Illinois near Chicago, because back in 2013, the city announced plans to replace conventional stormwater infrastructure with green stormwater infrastructure. And the goal in doing so was to help improve the water quality in the Fox River, which is this river here that runs through the city. And the two types of green stormwater infrastructure they focused on were infiltration catch basins and rain gardens. And so we'll first talk about the infiltration catch basins, and then we'll move on to the rain gardens. So just some diagrams so everyone knows what I'm talking about. So here we have a conventional and an infiltration catch basin. From like a street side or roadside view, they look the same because what differs between the two is at the bottoms of the catch basin. And so with a conventional catch basin, the idea is that water will flow in and just stand at the bottom because it's impermeable. And the standing water, as I mentioned before, creates a really good habitat for those juvenile mosquitoes. With an infiltration catch basin, kind of in the name, the water will flow in and then infiltrate down into the underlying soil because it has a permeable bottom. And so to look at how infiltration catch basins affect mosquito habitats, 88 conventional catch basins were divided among a control area down here and a treatment area up here. And in the pre-construction period, which was back in 2013, all 88 catch basins across both areas were conventional catch basins. And then in the post-construction period, which was 2014, 2015, 28 catch basins in the treatment area had been converted to infiltration catch basins. So to reiterate that study design, in the pre-construction period, every single catch basin here was a conventional catch basin. And then in the post-construction period, about 2/3 of the catch basins in the treatment area were now infiltration catch basins. And so across both construction periods during the summer, these catch basins were regularly sampled. They were inspected for the presence of standing water, and they were also sampled for juvenile mosquitoes. And first, we'll get into the standing water results. So this figure here, we have the construction period here on the x-axis, pre and post. And then the y-axis is looking at the proportion of catch basins that are not holding water by epi-week. So essentially, proportion of catch basins that are dry by epi-week. And in the pre-construction period, what we see is that among all these catch basin types, there's a small proportion of them not holding water. And this kind of makes sense because these are conventional catch basins intended to hold water. But then in the post-construction period, we see that among those catch basins in the treatment area that have now been converted to infiltration catch basins, there's a much larger proportion of these catch basins not holding water. This is kind of showing us that the infiltration catch basin design is working because more catch basins are not holding water. Now, we'll look at another figure that's looking at mosquito presence. Again, we have the same x-axis here, but the y-axis is now the proportion of catch basins that are not holding juvenile mosquitoes by epi-week. And what we're mainly focused on here is the change from pre to post among those catch basins in the treatment area that are now infiltration catch basins. So in the pre-construction period, when they're conventional catch basins, we see that there's a small proportion of these catch basins not holding mosquitoes by epi-week. But in the post-construction period, there's now a larger proportion of these catch basins not holding mosquitoes by epi-week. And we think this is likely because, yes, some infiltration catch basins still held water once they had been converted to ICBs, but they were likely built in a soil that had a lower infiltration rate. So think of more of a clay-like soil as opposed to a sandy soil. And so these catch basins might still have been holding water and presented as a good habitat for mosquitoes, but the water might not have stayed around long enough in order for those mosquitoes to fully complete their development because it was slowly infiltrating into the ground. But ultimately, from these results, we concluded that the infiltration catch basins help reduce the quantity of mosquito habitats. So they're helping just eliminate the presence of standing water, which can eliminate a mosquito habitat. And now we'll move on to discussing the rain gardens. So this is just a picture of what a rain garden in Aurora might have looked like from the ones that were implemented. Not every single rain garden that you'll see is built exactly like this. The general design is that you have a shallow depression in the land that's filled with shrubs or vegetation where water can infiltrate into. But in Aurora, the rain gardens were built at the corners of street intersections, and they contained these two structures, rain garden infiltration catch basins and rain garden overflow catch basins. And so within the context of the rain gardens, these rain garden infiltration catch basins were more just meant to divert the stormwater into the rain garden soil. They weren't really built with the intention of holding stormwater. The rain garden overflow catch basins were designed to hold stormwater once the rain garden soil was saturated. And so if the soil is saturated, as more water flows into the rain garden, it would overflow into the rain garden overflow catch basin. And these are just some field pictures of a close-up of a rain garden overflow catch basin, and then just a street view of a rain garden. And so to look at the impact of rain gardens on mosquito habitats, 17 control intersections and 17 rain garden intersections were selected. A control intersection just contained conventional catch basins. A rain garden intersection contained newly constructed rain gardens at those street corners. And then, so therefore, they also contained the rain garden infiltration catch basins, the rain garden overflow catch basins, and then also some conventional catch basins that were just left untouched at these intersections during the rain garden construction. Also, an important note is that the data that I'll get into next is only from 2015. We don't have the before and after data for the rain garden study. And then, but similarly, the catch basin structures were regularly inspected to see if they were holding water and also sampled for juvenile mosquitoes if they were found to be holding water. And so we'll get into the standing water results first again. Here on the x-axis, we have the different catch basin types. So like I said before, the control intersections only had conventional catch basins. The rain garden intersections had conventional catch basins, and then the RGIs and RGOs. And what we see, like the first thing that we see in this figure here is that the rain garden infiltration catch basins are significantly more likely to not be holding water compared to conventional catch basins. And this makes sense because, as I mentioned before, these rain garden infiltration catch basins in the rain gardens were more just meant to divert the stormwater into the rain garden soil. And then when looking at the conventional catch basins at control and rain garden intersections and the rain garden overflow catch basins, we see some visual differences in the relative frequency of whether they're holding or not holding water. But the rain garden overflow catch basins were not found to be significantly more or less likely to be holding water compared to conventional catch basins. So from this, we concluded that rain garden overflow catch basins are equally likely to be holding water compared to conventional catch basins. And now we'll get into the juvenile mosquito presence results. So here we have the same x-axis with the exception of the rain garden infiltration catch basins, because they rarely ever held water. They wouldn't be holding mosquitoes, so they're not included in this figure. But again, we see there are some visual differences in this figure and the relative frequency of whether these catch basins were holding or not holding mosquitoes when they were sampled. But we still found that rain garden overflow catch basins were not significantly more or less likely to be holding juvenile mosquitoes compared to conventional catch basins. So we also concluded that rain garden overflow catch basins are equally likely to be holding juvenile mosquitoes compared to conventional catch basins. And so these results definitely differ from what we saw when looking at the infiltration catch basins previously. because we're finding that rain garden overflow catch basins are continually holding water and they're continually holding juvenile mosquitoes. And so they're still used as a habitat source for mosquitoes. But we see some differences when looking at habitat quality between rain garden overflow catch basins and conventional catch basins. So I'll briefly explain some of the methods. So a starvation experiment was conducted where live pupae were extracted from both catch basin types and maintained on a water-only diet. And then their mortality was assessed at 12-hour intervals. And so we see these survival curves here for both females and males. And across both sexes, we see a pretty clear pattern where the adults that emerged from conventional catch basins tended to live longer compared to the adults that emerged from rain garden overflow catch basins. And then also the wing length of the mosquitoes was measured post-mortem because wing length it can be used as a proxy for body size. And so a longer wing length would be a larger body size, and that can demonstrate increased fitness. And so here's that figure with the wing length results, and we see the exact same pattern for both females and males. The adults that are emerging from conventional catch basins have longer wing lengths compared to adults emerging from rain garden overflow catch basins. So from these results, we concluded that rain garden overflow catch basins reduce the quality of mosquito habitat. So while they're still providing a habitat source for mosquitoes, the quality of that habitat source is reduced. And for why we think this is, we think it's likely because conventional catch basins are more nutrient rich compared to rain garden overflow catch basins. And so, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, stormwater runoff that flows into a conventional catch basin isn't filtered in any way. So that means that any nutrients, organic matter, suspended solid, detritus that's in that stormwater will end up in the conventional catch basin, and that can provide a really good food source for these mosquitoes as they're growing and developing. But in rain garden overflow catch basins, the water that collects is somewhat filtered, and so it's not necessarily containing nutrients, organic matter, suspended solid as the water in conventional catch basins is. And so we think this is likely contributing to the decreased fitness that we see among adults emerging from rain garden overflow catch basins. And now kind of transitioning to our next research question. So kind of just to reiterate, so we've seen that infiltration catch basins reduce the quantity of mosquito habitats, whereas rain gardens will reduce the quality of mosquito habitats. So we would expect that green stormwater infrastructure, GSI implementation, will benefit mosquito control efforts and have positive impacts on public health. And so that kind of brings us to the next research question, which is where is it suitable for green stormwater infrastructure to exist in the US, and how will this affect West Nile virus prevalence? So our research plan for this question is first to identify suitable areas in the US for green stormwater infrastructure using site suitability analysis, also referred to as multi-criteria decision analysis. And then after that would be to identify areas that have a high suitability for green stormwater infrastructure and a high prevalence of West Nile virus to explore public health benefits of green stormwater infrastructure, additional public health benefits. But for this presentation, we're just going to focus on this first step because that's what I'm currently working on. And so this is a broad overview of site suitability analysis or multi-criteria decision analysis. If you're unfamiliar with this method, it's just a method that's used to determine the best place or location to site something. Some examples that I've seen in the literature are especially looking at renewable energy. So where is it best to site wind farms or solar farms? But for us, we're interested in where is it best to site green stormwater infrastructure. And so the basic steps involve criteria selection. So which criteria are going to help you solve your problem, standardizing your criteria to just get everything into a common scale, weighing each criteria to determine its relative importance in generating the final suitability score, which is the last step. And so I'll go more in depth into each of these steps now. Oh, also one thing to note, we're planning to do this for the entire US, and then also for unit of analysis, that will depend on our input data. So the resolution will depend on the rasters used for input. Now we'll go into the specific steps. So first, criteria selection, as I mentioned before, it's kind of which criteria are going to help you solve your problem. typically you would consult experts or the existing literature to help you determine the set of criteria to use. One thing that we're currently discussing is kind of like what explicitly are we trying to model? And what I mean by this is first, if we were to look at just physical suitability, so asking the question of where is it suitable for green stormwater infrastructure to physically exist, we'd be interested in these criteria such as stormwater runoff volume, soil type, land use, land cover, or slope, because these criteria could help us determine where is it just physically suitable for these green stormwater infrastructure to exist. But also if we were to ask like kind of a slightly different question, which is where is it likely for green stormwater infrastructure to be implemented, we'd still be interested in these physical suitability criteria, but we might also be interested in some additional criteria that could give us a better indication of whether or not green stormwater infrastructure is likely to actually be implemented and be built. And so some potential criteria I listed here, I'll go into a bit. First would be like areas of new or redevelopment. The thought process behind this is that if you already have ongoing construction in an area, it might make more sense to also implement green stormwater infrastructure because construction is ongoing in that area. For attitudes towards green policies, we definitely need to workshop this more into like how we would actually get it into a data layer. But my thinking is that if an area or a city has adopted environmentally friendly policies in the past, they might be more likely to also adopt green stormwater infrastructure. For proximity to polluted water bodies, I was thinking back to the Aurora study and how the city decided to implement green stormwater infrastructure to help improve water quality in the Fox River. And so distance to polluted water bodies could give us another indication of whether or not an area would be likely to adopt green stormwater infrastructure. And then with sewer system type, it's kind of the same thinking. If a sewer type has a combined sewer system, it's likely to experience combined sewer overflows, bad for the environment. And so they might also be more likely to adopt green stormwater infrastructure. But moving on to the next step, which is just standardizing the criteria. So basically just getting everything into a common scale to just account for different units of measurements and all the input data. Two ways I've seen this done in the literature. The first being using like the score range procedure. So what this entails is breaking each of the main criteria that you decide to use into sub-criteria levels and just evaluating the suitability of those sub-criteria levels on a standard scale. So this is just a example, part of an example I pulled from a paper. They were looking at the suitability of a certain crop across the US. And so we see here that soil type is one of their criteria. And so they've listed certain soils as highly suitable on a standard scale, other soils is not suitable on a standard scale. For insulation, kind of the same idea. They have different insulation ranges that have corresponding standard suitability scores. So that's one way to get everything into a common unit of measurement. This process would be informed by, again, the existing literature or expert opinion. Another way I've seen this done is using min-max scaling or min-max normalization. It's just another way that rescales criteria. This way it rescales them into between 0 and 1. So two different ways to get everything onto a common scale before you would then move to weighing your criteria. And so this will help you determine how each criterion will contribute to the final suitability score. A common way I've seen this done in the literature is using the analytic hierarchy process, or the AHP. So what this method entails is creating a pairwise comparison matrix following the table here on this slide, where you're just evaluating the relative importance of one criteria over another. And you would do this for all the pairs of criteria that you have. And so, for example, when following the scale, if you're saying one criteria is if you're saying criteria A is 3 times as important as criteria B, then criteria B would be the reciprocal. It would be 1/3 times the importance. And so that's how you would go about creating that pairwise comparison matrix. And then to evaluate the consistency of that matrix and to just ensure that you can trust your weights moving forward, you calculate a consistency ratio, which is determined by comparing a consistency index to a random index. And the consistency index will just evaluate the consistency of the matrix you made. Essentially, it's looking at things like if you said criterion A is 3 times as important as criterion B, and criterion B is equally as important as criterion C, logically it would make sense for criterion A to also be 3 times as important as criterion C. So it's just checking to make sure you don't have any large inconsistencies in the matrix you created. And then the random index is just a consistency index from a randomly generated pairwise comparison matrices. And so by comparing the two, you want that ratio to be less than 10% because that just ensures that you can trust your criterion weights moving forward when generating your final suitability scores, which is now the next step. And so common way, there are some other ways that this can be done, but a common way I've seen is using what's called the weighted overlay method. And essentially, you're just multiplying the criterion weight by the standard value of that criterion and then doing it for the total number of criteria you have, adding the products across, and that will give you the final suitability score for a raster cell or for whatever unit of analysis you're looking at. You would do this for your entire study area. And then once you have final suitability scores for each unit of analysis, you could classify them into these scores are high suitability, these are moderate suitability, these are low suitability, et cetera, and then map those final outputs to visually display your results. And so this is just a brief, like a recap of all the steps that I just went through. Currently, we are here in the first step. So we're still just looking at which criteria are we going to use. Also talking about if we're looking at just physical suitability or like ability for implementation. Probably we'll end up doing both, to be honest. But this is the workflow and the methods that we plan to use. And so this concludes majority of my presentation, but I know that BCOs are typically interactive in some way. So I do have some audience questions if anyone wants to participate or share their insight. These are some of the questions that I've come up with. So the first being, if anyone has any ideas for potential criteria for a model to use and accompanying data layers, or also if there's a data layer that they've used and they think might be useful for us to look at. Also, if anyone is knowledgeable of site suitability analysis or multi-criteria decision analysis. This is my first time using this method, so if anyone has any insights as well. And then lastly, if anyone has any experience with or has worked with experts before, just in any capacity, not in the same capacity we're looking to do it with. Or also if you have any questions for me too, I'd be more than happy to take those as well. No one has any questions, that's fine too.
I was curious, you mentioned like attitudes about greenness. For that, what kind of scale would you be looking at? Because I could imagine there's ways to pull that from like political, like voting patterns or like Pew Research probably has something, but I'm guessing that kind of data is at like county or maybe census tract at the smallest, like trying to get that at like a, for example, block level to figure out what block would be most susceptible. So just wanted to get more thoughts on that. Like what scale you would want. Like obviously you probably still downshift that to get your meter by meter resolution or whatever, but what scale you're hoping to get, I guess.
Are you asking like in terms of the final resolution that we use, like what meter by meter raster for the entire model or just for that variable?
Just for that variable. Like you might have to downshift it later, but for example, if you get county level data, but your entire study area is in the same county, it's not helpful even if you do
Yeah.
downshift it. It's gonna be the same everywhere.
Yeah, I think, well, because we're looking to do this across the US, it would be like I think we'd be able to get a maybe like county or census level, but then we'd have to like resample that. But I think because across the US, we would still be able to have some differentiation. But I think if you're just looking at like, oh, in the city of Chicago, I don't think you'd be able to get like super fine resolution data. But because we're looking nationwide, I hope we can. I definitely still need to think about that more of where we would get the data from, and then also, yeah, at what level. Yeah, I see that comment in the chat too. I think that would also be another way, yeah, we could go about looking at that. too. Thank you for that. Anyone else have any other questions for me about anything else I talked about? No, it's fine. I can move on to my next slide here. Yeah, I think I'm still sharing. Thank you to iGuide and the Institute for Sustainability, Energy, and the Environment for funding. Also, big shout out to Andrew Mackay. He's the one that designed this study and collected all that data when he was a postdoc, and he's still helping us with the manuscript today. So thank you, Andrew. And then also thanks to my advisor, Brian. And then lastly, I'll be at the iGuide Forum, which is coming up soon in Chicago. So if you have any other questions, feel free to stop by and ask then too.
Any other questions at this point? If not, I actually had one more. So a lot of your suitability was based on like the effectiveness of the placement, but I'm wondering if you've thought a little bit about trying to quantify the cost of installation or even the benefit of for example, the cost savings by having the reduced mosquito population, trying to come up with numbers so that you could go to, for example, the city of Chicago or somewhere and say, hey, I'm asking you to spend some money, but I'm also going to be saving you money in the long run because, other infrastructure due to erosion or due to other reasons, for example, erosion with stormwater, is going to take more money to maintain in the long term, or you're going to be spending more on public health in the long term. Just wondering if that's like a next step or something you've thought of at all.
I think that's something that you could definitely look into. I think for us, when like if we have like a final suitability map of where is it suitable in the US for green stormwater infrastructure to be implemented, next steps would be looking more in depth into certain like hotspots if they arise. But I think what you're proposing would definitely be helpful on um, like city level scale, because I think that would be hard to do like at a nationwide scale because there's definitely big differences between each city. But I think that's definitely something that would be appropriate for a city level scale and could also help kind of influence policy more, because I definitely think when you get into money and savings, that can definitely help shape policy.
Any other thoughts, questions from the audience? We're open to any ideas you have, any data that could be put into this framework, any considerations that maybe should be added. All right. Doesn't sound like there's anything else. Is there any other questions that you have, Kaylee, or like things you're unsure of? Any other like specific data layers that you're not quite sure of that maybe you could give feedback on?
I think right now we're still trying to determine like what exactly we want to like every single criteria we want to look at. But one thing that I have come across is like a nationwide or also global data set that shows stormwater runoff potential. And so that's something that I came across that can help. That will definitely be a helpful data layer to show like which areas have, based on their land use, their land type, and also what soil they have, how much runoff could be generated from those areas. So that's definitely going to be a key variable. I know, but I think definitely some of the more social variables aimed at implementation potential would also definitely be helpful. That's all I have. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Alex, for your questions too.
Yeah. I guess one other thing, do you have a data set of like existing basins to compare against?
So that's another tricky thing because there's no, like, we wish there was green stormwater infrastructure, like point data at like a nation level, but that does not exist, unfortunately. Some cities have some data layers that we've been able to look at because that's something that we're also interested in is like once we create like final model outputs, do like those outputs align with where existing green stormwater infrastructure exists? And so that's something that you could try to look at like at a more city level or a fine level. But yeah, for the entire country, those data sets don't exist, unfortunately. Yeah, maybe they will in the future.
So there's OpenStreetMap data for it. It's not going to be perfect, but it might be a good starting place. And if you have issues with that, I can pull that for you.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I could take a look at that and then like compare it because there are some cities that we do have like decent data on. So we could compare the two to see how well they align and whether we could use the OSM data.
Yeah, but unless there are any other questions, I think we can probably call it a bit early.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
again for your presentation. Looking forward to chatting more at the iGuide Forum.
Yeah, thank you.